Pangu. First, before anything, there was a great cosmic egg. In this egg was nothing. Inside nothing was an unborn thing. It was Pangu. Pangu burst from the egg, and he was already a giant, 5 times bigger than a man. He was a hairy thing, and had horns on his head. And he grew 10 feet a day for 18,000 years. Pangu was the firstborn and the creator, and he was born with a hammer and chisel. He set to work to carve out the world. He pried the earth away from the sky and put the stars in their place. He built up the mountains, he dug the valleys, and he drew the paths of the rivers into the earth. He placed the sun and moon in the sky and told them how to move. He showed the seas how to roll and made the tides. He invented ships and bridges. Old Pangu worked and worked, and the world was never finished, until at last he died. And his skull became the dome of the sky, and his flesh became the soil for the fields. His bones became the rocks, his 4 limbs became the 4 corners of the globe, and his tears became the yellow river. His blood became all other rivers and the seas that flow today. And his hair became the plants, trees, and all that grows. The wind is his breath, the thunder his voice, the moon is his right eye, and the sun his left. The stars are his beard, the rain is his sweat. And the fleas that lived on his hairy body, the fleas became humanity.
Uranomi. In the beginning, Uranomi, the goddess of all things, rose out of chaos and could not find a place to rest her feet. She divided the seas from the sky and danced alone on its waves. She danced wildly towards the south and stirred up a great wind behind her. It seemed like something she could use to begin the work of creation. So she grabbed hold of the north wind, rubbed it between her hands, and poof! A great serpent appeared. She called him Ophion. Then she took the form of a dove, and she nestled down on the waves, and then she laid the universal egg. Uranomi commanded Ophion to wrap himself around the egg 7 times, and when it hatched, out tumbled her children, the sun and the moon, the planets and the stars. And finally, the earth and all its mountains and rivers, trees and plants, and all living things. Then Uranomi and Ophion went to Mount Olympus to live, but they did not live happily. Ophion told everyone that he was the one who had made the universe and all living things. That made Uranomi angry, very angry. She kicked Ophion in the head, knocked out his teeth, and banished him from Mount Olympus to the farthest, darkest caves below the earth.
Coyote places the stars. Do you look in the sky and see the figures there? Can you see the Big Dipper? Now I will tell you the story of those stars and why they are where they are. You can guess. It has to do with Coyote, the trickster. Once there were 5 wolf brothers. They traveled together, they hunted together, and when they had meat, they shared it with Coyote. One night Coyote passed by and saw the wolves. They were all looking up at the sky. And the next evening Coyote passed, and again the wolves were looking up in the sky. What are they looking at? Wondered Coyote. He likes to know everyone's business. The 3rd evening Coyote passed, and the wolves again were looking in the sky. And the 4th evening, too. Tell me, brother wolves, what are you looking at? And they said, Look, Coyote, up in the sky. Can you see the 2 animals there? They are so far away we cannot get to them. Oh, yes we can, Coyote said. Coyote, it is in the sky. How can we go there? No problem. It is easy for me. No trouble at all. So Coyote brought many arrows and started shooting them in the sky. The first arrow stuck in the sky. The tip of the second arrow stuck to the end of the first, the third to the second, and so on. Each arrow stuck into the one before it until there was a ladder reaching from the heavens to the earth. "Let's go," Coyote said. The oldest wolf went first and took his dog, then his wolf brothers, then Coyote. They climbed all day and all night. They climbed the next day and the next. They climbed for many days until they reached the sky. They stood in the sky, the 5 wolf brothers and Coyote, and looked at the animals they had seen from earth. They were 2 grizzly bears. The wolves approached the bears, but Coyote didn't trust bears and stood still. You know how Coyote can stand still. He looked at the wolves and the bears and thought, they look good, all of them, sitting there together. I think I'll just leave them for everyone to see. Then when people look up in the sky, they will see stars arranged just so, and they will tell each other, there's a story about those stars, and they will tell a story about me. So Coyote snuck down the ladder, taking out the arrows as he descended. Now there was no way for the wolves to get back. On earth, Coyote looked up at the sky and admired what he had done. And today you can see Coyote's work. We call those stars the Big Dipper. 3 wolves are the handles, and the others make up the middle or the bowl. The 2 grizzly bears are on the other side. They point to the North Star. Coyote liked his work so much, he put up more stars arranged in pictures all in the sky. Then with all the leftover stars, he created the Milky Way. So from now on, if someone asks you why the stars are placed just so in the sky, you can tell them, Coyote put them there. That is his work.
Izanagi and Izanami stir up the world. Have you heard the story of how order was stirred out of chaos by Izanagi, whose name means the male who invites, and Izanami, or the female who invites? They were brother and sister, and they were the 8th generation of gods. The 2 went out across the floating bridge of heaven and stuck a jeweled spear into the great chaos below. They stirred and stirred until the soupy chaos congealed and thickened. Ah, it was finished. So, Izanagi and Izanami pulled the spear out and shook off some drops from the tip. And those drops made the island of Onogoro. And they went there to live. There they built a great pillar and began to talk, quite formally, most politely, about the differences in their bodies. And soon Izanagi said, perhaps we should also be husband and wife. So they began to step around the pillar in opposite directions. When Izanami saw Izanagi, she said, "Oh, what a handsome man you are." And Izanagi said, "Oh, what a lovely woman you are." The first child of their union was a monster. Izanagi said, "This terrible wretch was born because you talked first. Let us walk around the pillar again, but this time be quiet, please. Let me talk first." So they stepped slowly around the pillar in opposite directions. When they saw each other, Izanagi said, "Oh, what a lovely woman you are." And Izanami replied, "Oh, what a handsome man you are." Now, the results of this union were much more satisfying. The 8 islands of Japan. And then came the sea, the rest of the earth, all the mountains, trees, winds, and seasons.
Spider-Woman creates the 2-legged. The world was ready for 2-legged, for humankind. So Spider-Woman dug up earth of 4 different colors: yellow, red, white, and black. She mixed the clay together with her own saliva and molded 4 figures. Then she covered them with her white cape, which contained all wisdom, and sang the creation song. She uncovered the 4 figures, and there were 4 male humans. She made 4 more figures, females who looked like her. They were the partners for the men. When she first uncovered the humans, It was early in the morning, the dawn of the first stage. She called this the time of the purple light. This is the time of man's creation. The people woke up and started to move. They stretched and walked, but they were not quite dried, their heads still damp and soft. This is when breath came into humans. It was the time of the yellow light, the dawn of the second stage. The sun rose above the horizon and dried the people well. They were finished and stood proudly before the sun, the great creator. This was the time of the red light, the final stage of dawn. Spider-Woman told the humans, "This is your father, the sun, the creator. Remember that and take care to always celebrate these three parts to your own creation: the purple light, the yellow light, and the red light. These lights will remind you of the mystery of your own creation, the breath of life, and the nurturing warmth of love."
Pea Pod Man. There were no people on Earth. There were plants and animals, but no people. The first person was still inside the pea pod. He stayed there for 4 days. On the 5th day, he split open the pod and fell to the ground. He stood up and he was a full-grown man. He shook himself out and looked at himself carefully. He moved his arms and legs, touched his neck and head, and he looked around at the world. He looked back at the pod still hanging there on the vine. Curious. He began to walk, but the ground was soft and moved under him. It made him feel sick. He knelt down and drank from a nearby pool. He felt better. Then he saw something coming towards him. A huge black thing swooped down from the sky and stopped and looked at him. It was Raven. Raven covered his head with his wing and pulled up his beak to the top of his head as if it were a mask. And then Raven was a man. He stared at Pea Pod Man and walked around him. Curious. Curious indeed. "Where did you come from? Who are you? There is no one like you here." But then Raven studied the man some more and saw that this strange new thing looked very much like himself. "I came from the pea pod," said the man, pointing to the pod still hanging from the vine. "The pea pod. I made that vine, but I didn't know you were inside. How curious." He told Pea Pod Man to come with him to higher, firmer ground. "Have you eaten anything?" he asked. The Pea Pod Man said, "I had some wet stuff down in the soft land." "Ah, that is water. Good, but not enough. Wait here." Raven pulled up his mask and turned back into a bird and flew away. Pea Pod Man waited there for him for 4 days. Raven returned with 4 berries in his talons. He turned back into a man and said, "Here, I brought you this to eat. These berries shall grow all over the earth. I will show you how. Now eat." Then out of clay, Raven made some mountain sheep. Man really liked them, especially when they pranced and played together. This worried Raven. If people like these too much, they will try to get them and kill them. So he put them up high in the mountains. Then he made the tame reindeer. "Oh, how beautiful they are," Man said. Again Raven was worried. "I will make this kind of reindeer scarce." And Raven made many more animals. And whenever Man admired one, it worried Raven. So he made the common reindeer. "See, Man, this is the common reindeer. They will be plentiful, and you may kill as many of these as you like." And he thought, "This man likes everything. I'd better make something that he will fear." So Raven took some red clay from the creek and made a bear. Raven said, "I think this man will be lonely by himself." He studied Man again. Walked around him. and looked in his eyes. Then he walked to the spot where he had made all the other animals, and made something that looked a lot like man. Then he attached to its head for hair the long grasses from the pool. When the figure had dried, he waved his wings over the figure, and there in its place was a beautiful woman. There you are, man. Here is a companion for you. For several days he led first man and first woman around the land. He made many new animals, birds, fishes, beavers, muskrats. Whenever he made a new animal, he explained to first man and first woman what to do with it, where to look for fish, and how to catch them, how to hunt and make clothes with animal hides, how to build kayaks and bows and arrows, spears and nets. Then Raven walked back to the place he had found first man, and saw that there were 3 more men who had just burst from their pea pods. And they were looking around, dazed, wondering where they were, who they were, just as first man had done. So Raven took each man in an opposite direction, and told each one about the world, and how to live in it.
Chameleon's catch. Chameleon sat on the banks of a river and wove a lovely net to trap fish. He put it into the river and went to sleep. The next morning, he pulled in his net, and it was full. "Good luck," he said, as he ate all the fish. And he set the trap again. The next morning he pulled in his net, but this time it was empty. "Bad luck," Chameleon said. The next morning he set his net again, and when he pulled it in, he found some strange creatures there. "What is this? I have never seen creatures like this before. I am looking at the unknown. I will ask my father. He will know what to do." He picked up the fish net carefully and carried the 2 unknown creatures to his father, the great god Mulungu. "Father," said he, "look what I have caught. Have you ever seen such creatures before?" Mulungu examined the small trapped creatures. He poked his finger gently towards them. "This is a man, and this is a woman. Take them out of the trap and put them on the ground." Chameleon did as his father asked, and the creatures grew and grew. They grew until they were as tall as you and I. All the animals came to see the new creatures and to watch what they would do. They moved, they walked on 2 legs. They found 2 sticks and rubbed them together, and so they made fire. But the fire was fierce and burned a bush and then spread to the forest. The animals ran for their lives. And the man and woman caught a buffalo, cooked it in the fire, and ate it. The animals watched, horrified. Every day they made new fires and killed another animal and ate it. Mulungu was heartbroken and angry. "Who are these creatures? They are burning up my plants. They are killing all my creatures. How can they be part of my great creation?" The animals ran away from the human creatures. As far as they could, they hid in the forest and the trees. Chameleon hid himself in the high trees. Mulungu was disgusted with the humans. "I am going to leave this earth. It is no good anymore with such creatures in it." "Spider," he called, "spin for me a rope that I may climb high in the sky. I must get away from these men and women." Spider spun a beautiful rope, and Mulungu climbed up to the sky and then gathered up the rope so that no humans could follow him there. And he and the other gods have lived in the sky ever since.
Pandora's Box. Pandora was the first woman. She lived with the gods. Her name means all gifts, and she indeed seemed to have all gifts: wisdom, beauty, modesty. Zeus, the chief of the gods, and a controlling and conniving god he is, decided to send her to live on Earth. And just before she left, Zeus gathered all the gods together to present her with a gift. Apollo handed her the most beautiful box Pandora had ever seen. She was delighted, ran her fingers over the surface, and was about to look inside when Apollo spoke. "Pandora, this is a present from the great and mighty Zeus." And then he whispered to her so that no one could hear. "Pandora, you must never, ever, for any reason, open this box. Zeus has ordered that we cannot tell you what is inside or meet a terrible fate ourselves. We can only give you fair warning, and this we have done. Please, heed it." "I will not even think of opening it if you tell me so," Pandora said, as she held the box close to her and stroked the fine designs on the lid. But secretly, Pandora thought she might find a way to look inside. You see, Pandora had one other quality, and Zeus knew it well. She was a curious girl. She had to know what everything was, how things were made, how they worked. She asked questions all the time. She explored into everything. Well, Pandora was sent to Earth to the house of Epimetheus, Prometheus's brother. Zeus was jealous of Prometheus, but that's another story. Well, Epimetheus walked in from the garden and saw Pandora. He stopped. He was speechless. "You are the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. No, I mean that there ever was anywhere. You are perfection itself." "No, perfection is not half what you are. Who are you?" "I am Pandora. I have been sent from Zeus to live with you." "From Zeus? Then from now on I will sing praises to Zeus day and night." "But wait, if you are from Zeus, there must be a trick here somewhere. I bet it's the box. What's in the box?" "I don't know," said Pandora. "Zeus gave it to me, but Apollo told me not to open it. But I can't imagine what would be so terrible about just a little peek. Can you?" "No, but Prometheus says you should never take a gift from Zeus. The box probably contains something awful. I'd listen to Apollo on this one. Give me the box and I will put it away." And Epimetheus put it away up high on a shelf. But not knowing what was in the box gnawed at Pandora. When she sat in the room, she would look up and see the corner of the box and long to know what was inside. When Epimetheus was away from the home, she would get on her tiptoes and try to touch the box. She could just barely touch one of the corners. Finally, she couldn't stand it any longer. One day, when Epimetheus was out, she pulled out a chest, pushed it over near the shelf, and climbed up on it, and reached for the box. Now she was high enough, and she pulled the box down off the shelf. She placed it on the floor and looked at it. She put her ear to the box, but she couldn't hear anything. She shook the box, but nothing moved. She even smelled the box. "Just a little peek cannot possibly hurt," she thought, and she lifted the lid just a crack. Just a crack. But that's all it took. The lid of the box flew up with such a force, and then the room went black and filled with the most horrible noises and roars, moans, screeches, and cries. Pandora screamed. Horrible, slithery, slimy, creeping things and flying and crawling things surrounded her and pecked at her skin and wrapped around her. They all carried with them the stench of despair. Because these creatures were the plagues of humankind. You know what they are: sorrow, pain, misery, envy, poverty. Pandora groped in the dark for the lid and then managed to get it back on the box. She tried to get the creatures back in the box, but it was no use. The slimy, slithering plagues had left the room and climbed down her walls and into the street, into the air, and into the world. Pandora held the box close to her, and she wept, frightened and exhausted. The box shook, and she realized that there was something still left inside. Now there was a sweet smell, and she looked in the box. There was a tiny dove-like creature. "And what are you? You are so soft, so sweet. Are you also a plague?" The creature was too tired to say anything. Pandora held the bird creature close to her heart and warmed it. The creature rested and then said, "Thank you for your care, but now I must leave." "Oh, please don't go. I am so lonely here." "I must go. I don't know what would become of the world if I stayed." "Why? Who are you?" The dove-like creature, still weak and wobbly, whispered, "I am Hope. I must go quickly into the world, for if I do not, humans will despair of life altogether." Hope perched on Pandora's hand, and then with one great jump flew out of the window and away. And then Pandora was left alone, and she wept for the terrible things she had done. And so it was that all the terrible things, envy and greed, hunger and poverty, ugliness, cruelty and despair, came into the world, and things could never be put right. And so it was also that hope stays in the world. It is the one thing that makes the torments of life, invented by the mighty but vengeful Zeus, and let loose by a curious girl, bearable, even today.
The Curses of Taoroa and Tu. The world and everything in it was created, and for many years harmony ruled everywhere. Only peace was known. Then all the gods began to quarrel with one another over every little thing. Who ruled the loveliest land? Who was more powerful? Who was the most beautiful? And then there were wars among the gods. Then the people too began to argue, and wars broke out. The great creator gods Taoroa and Tu, his wife, watched all this with great displeasure. They became so angry with the lesser gods and with man that they decided to curse the world. Hina heard what they were going to do. Who was Hina? She was the demigoddess who was married to the first man, Ti. She had two faces, one in front and one in back, and she always was able to make bad things not so bad. We should be grateful to Hina, and you shall soon see why. Taoroa and Tu first cursed the moon and the stars. They made the moon wane and lose its light. They made the stars blink and go out. But Hina interceded. She made it so that even though the moon disappears, it always reappears, and she made it so the stars twinkle in the sky. Taoroa and Tu then cursed the seas and made them shrink way back, what we call low tide. But Hina stepped in and made high tide, and now the seas alternate back and forth from low to high tide. Taoroa and Tu did not stop. They cursed the rivers. The waters were frightened and hid beneath the earth. But Hina talked to the timid waters, and so we have springs today. Taoroa and Tu cursed the trees, and their leaves turned yellow and brown and fell from the trees. Their fruit dried up and grew no more. And then Hina changed the curse just a bit. Yes, the trees would lose their leaves and their fruit, but then new leaves would replace the old, and new fruit would come again to the trees. And so there are seasons. Taoroa and Tu cursed people in the same way. They would wither and die. Hina was about to alter that curse as well, so that they, like leaves, would return to life in the next season, but Ti, her husband, stayed her hand. He had other plans. He invented death. Hina cried and begged him, "Have pity on man and woman. Don't you see how all the curses of Taoroa and Tu make them suffer? Look how beautiful the world is with stars twinkling and the moon's light, the great seas and rivers and leaves and fruitful plants. Isn't all this life much nicer than dying? Look how awful a thing a dying man is." But Ti would not change his mind. He said, "The great god Taoroa issued the curse of death. He loves to kill things, and I will obey his will. Look, here is my white heron. Death will come to a man when the white heron enters his body." And so death came to humankind, and even today we are all under the curse of Ti. But remember, Ti was a man, the first man. So he cursed not only all people forever, but himself as well.
The Llamas and the Flood. One day, an Indian tending his llamas noticed that his flock began to behave strangely. Very strangely indeed. They acted sad, as if they were grieving for a lost loved one. They ate nothing during the day, though the pasture was green and tasty. And at night they gazed at the stars and cried, "You, you!" The Indian called his llamas together and asked them what was wrong. For this was in the time when humans and animals conversed quite freely. The head llama spoke. "We are sad because, look, see how the stars are arranged in the skies. This arrangement tells us that in 5 days the whole world will be covered with water, and life will be destroyed." "What shall we do?" asked the Indian. "Go get yourself some food and follow us," the head llama instructed, and this he did. They climbed, the llamas and the Indian following, to the top of a high mountain. When they got to the top of the mountain, there were so many different kinds of animals already gathered that there was hardly room for them all. And then the sea began to rise, and rise, and rise. And soon it was almost to the top of the mountain, so the mountain too began to rise and rise. The animals crowded together very tightly to keep away from the rising sea. They were so crowded, in fact, that the fox's tail got wet. And that is why, even today, the tips of all foxes' tails are black. So the waters rose for 5 days, and the earth was covered with water, and all life was destroyed, except for the Indian and the animals on top of the mountain. And after 5 days, the waters began to recede. And as the waters shrank lower, so too did the mountain. And soon all the waters were gone, and life on earth started over. All from this lone Indian and all the animals who had gathered at the top of the mountain.